Mina? She can't hear me.
It is being recorded. It says on my screen.
Does it? Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right. Okay, it's on. Now I see. Okay. Then let's get started, dear brother. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Brother Leslie, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
I've missed you in these last couple of weeks, but we had to take care of some business, do some traveling, and we're trying to reorder a few things here for the next season to come. And if I recall correctly, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, if I recall correctly, we had been talking about the madhabs and their development in general terms, and how they were in a certain way interdependent, and there had been somewhat of a standoff, but the traditionalists seem to have either been eradicated or caved in, or whatever the case might be, and then a new tradition was replaced. So when I say traditionalist, and I suppose I want to say neo-traditionalists, where they sort of took over, where the old traditionalists who used to use their reason were trying to maintain the al-Islam that was bequeathed to us. So we were discussing some of that about the madhabs, and you promised to overturn some more stones along the way.
Yeah, there's lots of
and
those. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was hoping that you could tell us um, what stones you might have overturned, and what you may have found under them, as well as answer another question that I'm just going to throw on the floor, inshallah, and that is, do you know of the anything you can tell of us of the biographies of rationalists who resisted and were persecuted that the common Muslim might know, all right, from their general education? They might know these names, you see, and other names who they might not know that are maybe even more significant in their contemporaries, in the contemporary status. This is what I want to do for our listeners, and there apparently are lots of listeners who tune into us from time to time, here and elsewhere. You know, I want to give them a, um, a backbone of the history. You see, every book has a binding. It's got to have a backbone, and this is a history that has untold stories, untold narratives that most Muslims don't know. And when you are subverting the purpose of a people, it's the purpose of a religion, you change the history. And this is well known to those of us who have overturned the stones of history. And I think that's kind of what we're doing here. And um, Brother Benjamin uh, Bilal and I were just discussing this in terms of the Egyptian Jed, Djed, which represents the alif of the Arabic language, the moral uprightness or spiritual awakening that must take place. That's part of the ancient uh, teachings that were genuine with respect to the mystery religions in Egypt, and they all became perverted by the time of Moses and his Pharaoh and that sort of thing. So that's another part of the narrative. In any case, these um, these things need to be corrected so that we can build the backbone of a new uh, not a new narrative, but the untold narrative. Everybody knows the, the narrative that we've been told, and that's not the whole story. So we want to try and complete it, which is why I'm asking you and interviewing the people like yourself and a few other people. I'm going to do this with respect to the history of the Native American monotheists in North America and South America as well, with other individuals, if I'm fortunate enough to get hold of them. So, with that being said, brother, and with God's permission and grace, would you please share with us what you found under the stones and what you may have known about individuals who have been or are now being persecuted for this very same reason, inshallah?
Yeah, thank you, Brother Omar, once again for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you and your viewers. May I just take a couple of moments to do my customary
Sure.
dua? Right. Yeah, this is, how do I put this? Maybe I can begin by stating that a lot of the things I look at, of course, no one can escape his own background and prior experience. So, as someone who was born under and raised to a degree under the communist system, as you know, I lived
Mm-hmm.
in communist Czechoslovakia until I was 16 years old when we migrated to Canada, where
Mm-hmm.
I lived a further 20 years. And then the rest of my time I spent mostly here in Malaysia. So, I've been kind of, as it were, all over the place. My wife sometimes asks me, "Where's your home? I mean, why don't you put some roots down somewhere?" So I responded by saying, "Well, my home is wherever I lay my head or hang my hat." I think there's a
Mm-hmm.
song to that effect. So I've been a bit of a Rolling Stone, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Papa was a Rolling Stone. Remember that song? But anyway,
Yes, I remember. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so I'm still rolling on, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
This time chasing the truth. Well, in some ways, I have always been kind of on that track. But what I'm trying to say is that, in one of the problems with the communist system is that, on the one hand, in peacetime, you have a job, you have a place to stay,
Mm-hmm.
and you are not at risk of being thrown out on the street and have to live in a tent like so many people now in your country are living on the streets
Mm-hmm.
of Los Angeles and other places, and
Mm-hmm.
the towns in America seem to be, becoming abandoned and kind of. I watch these videos sometimes, and it's really sad to see what is
It is.
happening over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even also in Kentucky, as a matter of fact, but
Yeah.
many states are affected. So
Yes.
I have actually very briefly attributed this decline to the practice of riba or interest-based banking, but that's another story. We can discuss that some
Of
other
course.
time.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the disadvantages of living under a system like socialism or communism is that your freedom of speech is highly restricted and very difficult to say anything without getting into trouble, anything unconventional. I remember when I
Mm-hmm.
visited my father back in the 80s, yeah, I was informed by someone close to him that there was a driver of a streetcar who once said to the people trying to get into the streetcar, he made something of a joke saying, "Come on, people, don't crowd into the streetcar like the Soviets into Afghanistan," or something like
Oh,
that.
Jesus.
Yeah, so you can imagine somebody reported him to the authorities, and guess what was
Yeah.
the result? He was accused of something like disrespecting the Republic. I forget what exactly was the nominal
Yes, of
charge.
course.
But the
Mm-hmm.
sentence was 4.5 years in prison or in a gulag somewhere.
Yeah.
It was just unbelievable. And
Mm-hmm.
there's also a book written by a well-known Czech writer, Milan Kundera, who became
Mm-hmm.
popular in New York after he migrated to the United States. And the name of the book is Joke. And it's a book also about some fellow who wrote a joke on the back of a postcard to his girlfriend about Joseph
Mm-hmm.
Stalin. And likewise,
Oh.
the postcard was intercepted, and this fellow ended up for a decade or two somewhere in Siberia. And
Oh my
somehow
God.
I know it was horrible. So somehow he managed to survive and what have you. But anyway, I think they made a film about it as well.
Mm-hmm.
I read that book in a course I took with one other well-known Czech expat writer, Josef Škvorecký, who was an instructor at
Mm-hmm.
Innis College at the University of Toronto.
Yes, I remember him. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
he also wrote a book called The Cowards about
Mm-hmm.
the Czech
Mm-hmm.
community during the Nazi occupation. But anyway, so I read the book while I was taking his course on film. I
Mm-hmm.
was kind of interested in perhaps pursuing that as a path, as I wanted to I felt I was not communicating to a sufficient number of people. I thought film would be a good way to kind of
Mm-hmm.
this whole concept of mass communication. I felt that as an academician, but I had a very small audience, so to speak, and I wanted to reach out
Yes.
to a greater number of people. You see, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to be stuck
Mm-hmm.
in the ivory tower. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
however that may be, so I became very sensitive to this idea of freedom of expression, and that's one of the things I appreciated greatly about Canada and the Western world in general, because we do have that freedom of expression. Although
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that there are no limits on what we say or what we can say, as we have seen most recently in
Mm-hmm.
the banning of the video about Ukraine from YouTube done by
Mm-hmm.
Oliver Stone, which was called Ukraine on Fire, and other people like Steve Hedges was deplatformed also from YouTube because he was saying things that were not really music to the ears of the establishment.
Mm-hmm.
And also COVID criticism, the vaccine critics also have been kind of silenced or deplatformed. So there's a certain amount of censorship going on even in the West. However, on the whole, there's still some avenues for alternative
Mm-hmm.
viewpoints to be heard. The alternative media, because obviously the mainstream media has really become a tool. I don't know if I can say of the military industrial complex. Some
It
people are
is.
saying that. But
It
anyway,
is.
to come back to this idea of expression, freedom of expression. And by the way, my former boss and mentor, Professor Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali, wrote a book called, and I highly recommend this book. It's called Freedom of Expression in Islam, an excellent book.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes into the arguments, for the freedom of expression in Islam. And someone told me, in fact, this was one of Prince Charles's favorite books on
Mm-hmm.
Islam, I suppose. So, freedom of expression and freedom of religion, of course, are guaranteed in the Quran. Freedom of religion is guaranteed in verse 256, Surah Al-Baqarah, although it is often mistranslated in English,
Mm-hmm.
which is a terrible travesty, but that's another issue. We can discuss that separately.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we know also that in Islamic history there were periods where freedom of expression was repressed and suppressed, and people died, sometimes in large numbers, because they dared to say things that the political authorities did not take kindly to.
Yes.
So initially, I mean, where does it really begin? Here, people may have different opinions. We
Mm-hmm.
know that there were disagreements in the Ummah already from the time of the Abu Bakr, when there was the so-called wars of apostasy.
Mm-hmm.
That was a kind of the so-called apostates who refused to pay zakat, allegedly,
Mm-hmm.
where they were persecuted on the basis of the hadith, according to which whoever changes his religion kill him, which is completely against the Quran. And the Prophet himself never actually killed anyone for apostasy. So,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, Abu Bakr here, when he went to war against, when he went against the apostates, quote unquote, he did not actually follow either the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet, because the Quran doesn't say to kill the apostates, and the Prophet never did that as part of his Sunnah. So that was, I think, a significant departure from both Quran and Sunnah by the, very first of the righteous caliphs. Now, with all due respect to him, I'm sure he got many things right, but I fear that this was perhaps not one of them. But
Mhm.
anyway, however that may be, we know that discord, dissenting opinions were expressed also about who should be the next caliph. There were
Mhm.
some wars also between the fitnas, the Battle of Camel, the Battle of Sijin. According to
Mhm.
Muhammad Shahrur, 15,000 Sahaba died in his first fitna,
Mhm.
these engagements, and more people died later on. Then there was, of course, the persecution of the people who believed in freedom. Under Marwan, the people who believed in freedom of the will, to be more precise, the Qadarites, who were
Mhm.
opposed by the Jabarites, who were people who believed in determinism or fatalism, if you like, or
Mhm.
predestination.
Mhm.
So Marwan basically put to death the leader of the Qadarites in 699, and the name of this leader was Mabad al-Juhani. So that was a persecution of people who believed in freedom. The following
Mhm.
century, we had a further persecution or a pogrom, I think even worse than what we have witnessed here in the 600s of the current era. And that was the persecution of the people who believed in reason. So
Mhm.
in the 600s, we have the persecution of people who believed in freedom. The following century, we have a persecution of people who believed in reason. And these
Mhm.
were the rationalists. Actually, we can add the freedom to the rationalists, because the rationalists,
Mhm.
yes, they believed in reason, but they also believed, like the Qadarites before them, in freedom. In fact, they were accused of the crime of being free thinkers. That was the crime
Mhm.
leveled against them, the charge leveled
Mhm.
against them. The Arabic term is zindiq or zandaka. They were free thinkers, which is also sometimes understood as atheists. So, according to Suyuti, as I referred to this before in our previous discussions, but I think it merits a mention again. According to Suyuti, 5,000 philosophers were slaughtered in 786 in this
Mhm.
massive persecution of thinkers, free thinkers. This was an act of, I believe, fanaticism. So the Orientalists are not entirely wrong when they point to certain tendencies towards fanaticism among certain
Mhm.
rulers, especially. So,
Mhm.
according to Suyuti, who was quoted by Jamaluddin al-Afghani in a debate with Renan, the French Orientalist, and this
Mhm.
event is referred to in a book edited by Charles Kurzman of
Mhm.
Oxford University Press, in a book published by Oxford University Press, and the book is called
Mhm.
Modernist Islam. So, for the viewers who want to know where I'm getting this information, they can find it there. The book is available online in a PDF format in a good condition. You can, in fact, download the entire book. And so is a sister book, by the way, which is called Liberal Islam. So the two volumes make for a very interesting reading. So
Mhm.
we have seen here, a massive persecution of thinkers, free thinkers. And when I first read about it, and that wasn't that long ago, because traditional ulama are not fond of recalling these events. Some of them may not even be aware of them, because
Yes.
this event was part of what has come to us, what is referred among scholars as the mihna, or the Inquisition. You see,
Mhm.
now, but what people don't realize, that in fact the Inquisition started earlier than most people think or are taught
Mhm.
by traditionists, and that there were two parts to the fitna.
Mhm.
The event that I'm referring to took place in the first part of the fitna in
Mhm.
786, and the fitna itself was started by the third Abbasid caliph. His name was al-Mahdi, and this mass murder of the philosophers or thinkers and scientists took place after he died, under the rule of his
Mhm.
son, whose name was Musa al-Hadi, you see.
Mhm.
So this was part of the first fitna. The fitna, sorry, not fitna, but the mihna. So but the mihna that we normally hear about is the mihna
Mhm.
conducted by the so-called rationalists. You see, now when the tables
Mhm.
turned, rationalists came to power, beginning with Al-Ma'mun. Perhaps even Harun al-Rashid could be included among the rationalists. And the rationalists, I mean the Mu'tazilites, also basically persecuted the traditionalists, but nowhere nearly as viciously, as aggressively, and as violently as the traditionalists persecuted the rationalists. Because to my knowledge, yes, during the Mihna, conducted by the rationalists, Ibn Hanbal was beaten in hot sun and lashed, and he spent time in prison. Yes, this has been documented, and other, imams were, treated badly. But to my knowledge, not a single person died, unless I'm missing something. So there's no comparison between the two events. I think what the traditionalists did to the rationalists was far incomparably worse than what the rationalists did to the traditionalists. Yet what we hear from traditionalists, not surprisingly, is the evil things that the rationalists did to the traditionalists, but almost nothing, not even a whisper about this big snake under the stone, the persecution of the rationalists, which I, in fact, as someone who has previously taught history, including a number of subjects actually, perhaps up to a dozen subjects, including history, including actually European history, Canadian European history, and in European history we have a very ugly event that took place during the French Revolution in 1792, and this event is known as the Reign of Terror. This was a Reign of Terror where 16,000, this time traditionists, were put to death at the guillotine for the crime of being supporters of the monarchy or tradition. Yeah, and this time the perpetrators were rationalists, the people who prided themselves on being part of the age of reason, the age of enlightenment. You see, because that's what the French Revolution was about, the rights of man and what have you. Fraternité, égalité, liberté, fraternity, equality, and liberty. These were the slogans of the French revolutionaries. So we had in Europe the so-called Reign of Terror, mass murder of traditionalists. But when we look back 1,000 years earlier, it seems that in Islamic history we had something similar, I'm sorry to say.
Yes.
The Reign of Terror, during which the traditionalists terrorized the rationalists. And I don't hesitate to call it the Reign of Terror. So terrorism did not begin with Al-Qaeda, quite frankly, or any of these recent manifestations of violent extremists. It was there from a fairly early time. Why is it that traditional Muslims have so much difficulty acknowledging this and dealing with, this and accepting, yes, well, we messed up. We have to do better next time. You see. I sense a serious lack of a critical perspective, especially self-critical perspective in traditional scholarship. It almost reads much of it like some kind of a whitewash, a sanitization of history. What's the problem in admitting that there were these errors, massive errors made? I mean, even in the Western world, we have many academicians who admit that, the Western civilization messed up in so many ways. Yeah, we had slavery, we had, religious wars between Catholics and Protestants, we had persecution, witch burning, we had our own Inquisition, right? So and now we have these wars, endless wars since World War II, and people are speaking up against it. So how can you possibly make progress unless you admit that here or there we messed up, we have to do better next time? So I'm mentioning these events to highlight that Islamic history, both intellectual and political, is not as hunky-dory as some of the traditional scholars are trying to make it look like. There was a lot of violence actually taking place. And if you like to have a list of the people who were persecuted, they included, by the way, the Mu'tazilites or the rationalists. Their literature was destroyed also. Mustafa Akyol, who became a traditionalist and who turned the tables back against the Mu'tazilites in, I think, 852. He also persecuted the rationalists once again, and this attack was continued on the rationalism, was continued in the form of the closure of the gates to ijtihad and also in the attack on the philosophers by Imam al-Ghazali, who declared in one of his writings that if you hear the sound of voices singing coming from a house, you can break into the house, commit a crime, in other words, of entering illegally, which is forbidden in the Quran. You can break into the house and destroy the musical instruments inside the house, which is a second crime. So why is Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali advising people to commit these two crimes when Allah very clearly prohibits entering anybody's private dwelling without permission and without invitation? This is so. This advice of his sounds to me very extreme. Why is he held in such high esteem in among traditional Muslims? Why isn't he treated for what he sounds like he was, as an extremist of sort? I mean, who else would advise you to do something like this? But anyway, and also, by the way, he supported Jihad al-Talab, which means spreading Islam by the sword. This is documented. Quotations to that effect. So, and this whole Jihad al-Talab to me strikes me as a form of, really another form of state terrorism. Why? Because the entire Ummah is expected to go to war against non-Muslims as a religious requirement once every year, even when the non-Muslims are not attacking the Ummah. Now, what kind of thinking is this? This is really, what's the right word that I'm looking for? This is really very problematic. I cannot believe this.
It's outrageous.
Outrageous. So there's a lot of problems in traditional Islamic scholarship. This needs to be cleaned up, basically, and those stones need to be overturned, and the snakes have to be dealt with properly. And so, but I wanted to mention also, there's a book that was recommended to me by some Ahmadi fellow. I forget the name of the writer, but the title of the book is Murder in the Name of Allah. You can Google it and find it online. And in it, he has a nice list. Well, it's not a nice list. It's a list of all the people who were killed because of their opposition to traditional Islam. And the book, to a significant extent, is a critique of the ideas of Abu al-Maududi, who was another extremist who believed in spreading Islam by the sword, misreading the Quran very badly. He was actually a journalist. He wasn't really a scholar. And so he was also influenced by Marxism, it seems. And unfortunately, in Pakistan, many people took his ideas very seriously, and they still do. And so as a result, they have a very distorted, corrupted understanding of this deen. Again, there's some more work for us here. And we have to, give similar attention to other extremists in the Muslim intellectual tradition. I don't know if I should even use the word intellectual. People that include Ibn Taymiyyah and Sayyid Qutb. They both are very belligerent and give a very politicized, politically corrupted understanding or knowledge of this deen. So we need to get away from that. I'm not saying that fighting is prohibited in the Quran. It isn't. It is permitted, but only under very restricted conditions, only in self-defense or against persecution. Those are the only two grounds where Allah permits fighting. So, and Muhammad Shahrur does a pretty good job in his book on called Quran Morality and Critical Reason, outlining how the traditional fuqaha have twisted the meaning of the key verses in the Quran to justify this aggressive warfare, to basically to justify the commission of war crimes in the name of Allah. Can you believe this?
Yes.
This is absolutely shocking, and I'm still trying to come to grips with it. It's coming such a shock, but it really. I mean, now I really understand why my former boss, Professor Hashim Kamali, prohibited me actually from writing a paper on jihad. I don't think he wanted me to find all these snakes. But since I left the institute, I went back to my jihad paper, and I'm really absolutely shocked. In fact, I'm trying to finish another book on the subject. Hopefully by the end of this month, I can publish it. It's actually an expanded version of the paper I was supposed to present to the Oxford Institute for British Islam after a talk I gave there last August. But I withdrew my paper from the publication after I saw basically what the editor did to my paper. It was basically a hatchet job such as I have never seen anything like it in my whole life. 27 of my block quotations were converted into body text without using quotation marks. Converting a block quotation to body text is a mistake in the first place. It's completely against custom in academic writing. That was a mistake. And then forgetting to put, if you do that, at least you should put quotation marks around the quotation to show that these are not my words. But he
Yes.
didn't do that, making it
Oh
look
my
like
gosh.
I plagiarized 27 paragraphs of text of someone else's work, making it look like my own work. And this
Oh
was
my
after I
gosh.
got this was after I got an email from him cautioning me against plagiarism. Can you believe this?
Oh
I
my
was
God.
I I mean, real shock. I completely lost confidence in that institute. As far as I'm concerned, that institute is going exactly nowhere, not under the kind of leadership they have at the moment. They really
Well,
have
with
to have some house cleaning to do. I'm serious.
well, that kind of editing is just that's outrageous in itself. My goodness me! But we do see a decline in the degree of individual capabilities with each passing generation now. So I think if you look at dictionaries now and 150 years ago, the words and the writings, the grammar, completely different. And you see, when I'm looking for inspiration on how to turn a phrase or um, maybe tweak an idea, I'll go back to 19th and 18th century writers, and I'll go back to non-English speaking writers who have been translated into English because their translations are even better than what we're getting today in today's scholarship. It's fragmented and disconnected, and so much of it is irrelevant. It's sad to hear what you just related, and it's kind of like a synopsis of what we've been discussing here these past several months. I'm interested to see how it is that we can maybe proceed and put our heads together with other people this coming year to see what we can do to maybe institutionalize some sort of approach to re-education on the part of I'm not interested in trying to get to the masses or anything of that nature, like that. But we have an audience that is interested, you see, and keenly interested. And I'm just thinking, well, rather than um, having them sort of do a hodgepodge, sort of take something from here, something from there, something from another source here, and try to put together like some jigsaw puzzle. Maybe we can do some sort of a institutionalized approach online where lectures and discussions can be presented and webinars could be had where we have sample students and a sample board of scholars or shura who can maybe field the questions, if you will, on an ongoing basis because there's so much to be covered, and there's so many different perspectives and so many different disciplines that need to be we need to concern ourselves with when we're looking at revisionist work like this, because that's what it is. We're not recreating. We're revising, and in that revising, we're uncovering things that have either been hidden or unknown for whatever the reasons were, perfidious and otherwise. It doesn't much matter. So I'm hoping something like that we can do in the future. This is a month now where I've had to make some changes, and Brother Bilal is making some changes. I don't know how it is also with yourself, but we'll find out sometime soon. I'm readdressing our own webinar page this coming month or so, and I want to establish some sort of a panel that I can maybe rotate on a regular basis so that no one person is overburdened, so that we can review some aspects of any given topic with more than one mentor on board, with a group of different students from wherever, and just field these questions, you see, from time to time. I like to interview people and try and pull out of persons like yourself what you know, and try to, maybe rehash it or make it relevant for our listeners. Because when you talk in the academic circles, there's academicians understand that narrative, but most people at the pedestrian level, they say, "Huh? What's that word? What's that word mean? Who were they?" And they have these tremendous gaps. It's like those old, those old computer cards with all the punches in them. It's tremendous gaps in knowledge here. It's very difficult to keep a narrative going so that everybody remains on the same page. That's why stories are wonderful, because with a story, everyone can stay on the same page. Well, Islam's story, as we've been handed it, um, has too many gaps in it. And we're trying to,
Holes in the narrative. Holes in the narrative. To
yes,
borrow Yasir Qadhi's expression.
yes, there's too many holes in the narrative, you see. So we're trying to plug these up, and it's not an easy thing to do when you've got a disparate audience and you can't always see them and you don't know what's really on their minds. Well, I know what's on my mind, and I know what many of the students are talking about. And I'm not interested in having debates or anything of that nature. I'm interested in talking to people who know what they're talking about and getting the facts out of them as best we can. I love stone turners. So I, I really love stone turners like yourself. So I'm so happy, brother, we have a chance to touch base again. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us today?
Yeah, I,
Anything in particular, brother?
yeah. About the persecution of thinkers, I'd like to add
Yes,
also that Imam
sure.
Abu Hanifa, by the way, who
Hmm.
was the first of the four imams, he was apparently poisoned in prison. I haven't heard that until quite
Hmm.
recently.
Hmm.
And he was the leader of the so-called Ahlil al-Ra'i, the people of opinion, or the rationalists. That
Hmm.
is how Taj Rawani presents him and his group. And this group was opposed by the so-called Ahlil Hadith, the people of the traditions, whose leader was Imam al-Shafi'i. However, the I'm after reading a book by Daniel Brown called "Rethinking Tradition in Islamic Modern Islam, Contemporary Islam, or Modern Islam." I forget exactly how the title goes. He agrees that there was a tension, a struggle between two groups, and he
Hmm.
agrees that on one side were the Ahli al-Hadith, today we know them as the Ahli al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, led by
Hmm.
Imam al-Shafi at the time. But
Hmm.
the other side of the other group, he does not refer to them as much as the Ahli al-Rai, or the people of opinion, but he emphasizes the presence in that group of the so-called Ahli al-Quran, you see.
Hmm.
Because apparently there were people who, among the so-called mutakallimun or ahlil kalam, who only followed the Quran, and they did not have any room for the hadith, so to speak. And
Hmm.
even Abu Hanifa, according to Daniel Brown in that book of his, not to be confused with Jonathan Brown, who is at
Yes. Hmm.
Georgetown University. According to Daniel Brown, Abu Hanifa he did accept some hadith, but he had a very high standard for accepting hadith, and that was that the hadith had to be verbatim, the exact words of the Prophet, before he would
Hmm.
accept it. for the purpose of jurisprudence and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also the Ahlil in this group, the so-called Ahlil Rai, or the rationalists, or the people of opinion, if you want to refer to them that way. There were also the Mu'tazilites, who believed in reason, rationalism. They believed in freedom of the will. They were also believers in Tawheed, and they also believed in justice. You know, they were known as the people of Tawheed and justice. So this group was basically opposed by the Ahlul Hadith, Imam al-Shafi'i in particular, who tried to make the Sunnah or the Hadith, to him the two were the same thing basically, even though clearly the Sunnah and the Hadith are two different things. He conflated them. So he was trying to make the Sunnah or the Hadith into a foundation of Islamic legislation, which I think personally was not a step in the right direction, because the Quran is very clear that legislation is the exclusive prerogative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. La hukmu illa lillah. Allah does not share his, mulk with anyone, his authority with anyone. So if any human being wants to provide a law as part of the deen, he is basically presenting himself as a god and basically a competitor with Allah, a second legislator, and that is basically a case of shirk. I called it juristic shirk. So all legislation pertaining to religion has to be based on Quran alone, exclusively on the Quran. We can make laws that are, say, about traffic and what have you. They don't have to be based on the Quran, but these laws have nothing directly to do with the deen. So what I'm trying to say is that the persecution of Abu Hanifa may have been part of that. It seems was part of that backlash against the rationalists that we have witnessed from a very early stage in Islamic intellectual history. And in fact, we perceive it until today, because if you see the tension between the two groups as a tension between the followers of the Book of Allah on the one hand, and the followers of the books of traditions, on man-made traditions or hearsay, as I sometimes refer to it, if you think of that, the tension between those two groups back then in those terms, then we have that tension until this day here. And we even encounter it in some of our clubhouse, discussions. We have Sunnis versus the Quran-only people, and these debates just keep surfacing. And of course, we also had Ahlul Quran in India, the Indian subcontinent, people like Chakralavi and others, Juraiji, and also in Egypt, there was a group of people who were Quran-only or Quran-centric. But what people overlook, the people who are really focused on the Sunnah or the Hadith, is that the Prophet himself was actually, he followed the Quran, and he followed only the Quran. So he was, in fact, the first person in a group called the Ahlul Quran, or even if you don't mind using the word Quranist, you can say he was in fact the first Quranist, you see. Yes. So people who use the word Quranist in a derogatory way, they should think twice, because they could be casting aspersions against the Prophet himself, which we should not do under any conditions.
Yes.
So the Prophet was not, so in other words, our Sunni brothers and sisters actually, have they understood the meaning of Sunnah, you see? I personally agree that the Prophet did have a Sunnah, even though some of my friends on Clubhouse say that the Sunnah of the Prophet is never mentioned in the Quran, and they are right, it's not mentioned. However, this does not mean that he did not have a Sunnah. I think he had. But his Sunnah was not what people think of as the Sunnah today. Because when people say Sunnah of the Prophet today, they mean following Bukhari, Tirmidhi, Nasai, Ibn Majah, and all the others. Well, did the Prophet follow any of those books? Please tell me. Did he follow any of these people? Did he even hear about them? He not only didn't follow any of these books of Hadith, he never even heard about them. And he couldn't have heard about them because they were not even born yet when he was following the Quran. So the traditional understanding of Sunnah is badly flawed, you see, because to follow the Sunnah of the Prophet, we need to follow what the Prophet himself followed, which was the Quran. If you follow the Quran, then you are following the Sunnah of the Prophet. You are following the real Sunnah of the Prophet. If you're following other books and think you are following the Sunnah of the Prophet, I think you need to rethink your position, because we are following something that the Prophet did not follow, and never even heard about. So I just like to make that clear for the viewers. But please correct me if I'm wrong, if I missed anything. Thank you.
No, no, no. That seems to be that seems to be a correct path of reasoning, dear brother. There's no doubt about that. My concerns are how this is disenfranchising the younger Muslims who are now come to the West, and they don't have such a strong foundation in their own traditions, you see. And then they see these libertarian boundaries expanding here in the West, and their religion, on the other hand, is telling them this, that, and the other thing. And where is it that they can ground themselves, you see? And this is what I'm kind of working this through now in my own imagination with respect to the ancient Egyptian mystery having to do with the Jed, or the backbone. Because if you look at this thing, it's a pillar, okay? So a pillar is going to be doing something that's going to be sustaining force. And, if you're going to use a pillar, well, you've got to take advantage of the mechanics. And of course, the base of the pillar's got to stand on something firm. And then the pillar's got to be strong enough to conduct or hold whatever weight is coming from above. So it's conductor, it's a weight sustainer, this sort of thing. And we know it's associated with the backbone, or the alif. So it's a raising of the Jed, which was calling a spiritual reawakening, which the Christians called being born again, you know. So everything's taken out of context and then being given new imaginations, which are removed, you see, from the original intent, which is in fact the gospel, if you will. It's the same narrative. If you study the ancient mystery religions and you get them down to their core, the core is always the same. It's always the same. So there's all these perversions have been added to it, like so many layers on an onion. It's just one layer of corruption on top of another. But if you can get it down to the core, then you begin to see, okay, well, maybe there's a little speck of light that the perennialists can share with me on the same stage. You see? But I'm not ready to sing kumbaya with them. In any case, um, uh, what we want to do is we want to get our students grounded. You see, just like the pillar has to be grounded, the jet has to be grounded. It has to be established so that it's upright and can withstand pressure and can conduct whatever's coming from heavens into the earth, and from the earth into the heavens, because this is a big circuit. It's a big. You can't just think linearly here. You have to think in terms of the Earth's magnetosphere, which goes out hundreds of thousands of miles, and it's a big circular spiral sort of thing. And this conductance is going on all the time. And so, oh, well, now I'm getting into the fact that, hey, we have to remain connected to this thing now, don't we? That's what Solat is. That's what it's for. What are we remaining connected to? Creation. Is creation not the Quran? Of course it is. It's another book, and it's all one book, you see. So it's a collection of books, if you will, because you can't have the Quran without creation, and you can't do what's in the Quran unless you are connected with creation. And if you're not standing upright on this resurrected pillar that's going to allow you to do the connection, you got a problem with heaven. You got a problem with guidance. You got a problem with relevance. What's it all mean? What's it all about? Is it about me getting approval just because I know how to recite the Quran? Is it about me just getting approval and my dad slapping me on the shoulder because I'm showing that, I'm such a good Muslim by presenting a wonderful iftar. You see, is that what it's all about? I don't think so. I don't think so. We have human needs, and to meet these needs, we have to communicate with each other in order to form the community that's going to allow these needs to be met in a just manner. You see, so if we're not doing that, all of these other discussions are useless. You see, I have a need for food. I asked the Kalahari. I just saw an interview for a Kalahari native chief. He said, "What's the most important things in life?" He said, "Food, water, and not being alone. Because if you're alone, the hyenas will get you." He didn't say anything about God or angels or heaven or hell or anything. No, it's meat, water, life, survival, here and hereafter. You know, he's not too interested in all this metaphysical talk. And guess who the prophet said we should go live with? You see, people like him, because they know how to survive. They know what's important. So, what we're trying to do here, dear brother, is make Islam relevant so that the proper elements can be mixed in the right proportions so that people can think correctly and make the correct rational decisions with respect to their perceptions, with respect to their deen and how it is applied in the dunya. Alhamdulillah. Well, thank you once again for this hour, and I look forward to many more to come, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you also, brother.
Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.